Welcome to Quantum Potential, a podcast dedicated to curiosity, discovery, and the bold new ideas shaping our future. I'm Sibel Raver, Provost of Vanderbilt University. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Professor Kelly Goldsmith. Kelly is the E. Bronson Ingram Professor of Marketing at Vanderbilt's Owen Graduate School of Management. Drawing on cognitive and social psychology, economics, anthropology, evolutionary biology, and marketing, Goldsmith examines how scarcity shapes our attention, our motivation, our feelings of competition, and our choices. Beyond her scholarship, Kelly is known across campus as an intellectual builder of bridges, and I'm so grateful to you, Kelly, for doing that. You lead incredibly important conversations that bring together business, technology, and culture. You've also won numerous awards for your research and your teaching here at Vanderbilt. You're just such a great leader at this university and in our community. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Quantum Potential.
Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor.
So the first thing that I really would love to turn to is your work on scarcity. It's such an important concept. I think it's not just about having less. It's also about perceiving a discrepancy between what we have and what we think we need. But before we dive into the power of this key psychological construct, whether it's in marketing or in the wider world, let's just back up. How do you define scarcity? How do you think about that construct?
Well, I think you actually summed it up really perfectly. When we got started on this scarcity research, you would think, because it's such a big influence on how we live our days, it's also a big influence in marketing, you would think that there would be a rich literature on how consumers deal with these feelings of not having enough. But really, when we got started in this space, there was not much that existed. And so we had to really sell our field on why this is worth studying, which is partially how we got involved drawing from so many disparate fields in academia, because we wanted to contextualize, no, this is something that, biological anthropologists would care about too, along with lots of fields of psychology and so on, and definitely economists. So we drew from all these different literatures to really contextualize why studying this matters. But then it's tough because you got to come up with one definition that's going to encompass all of that. And so when we wrote the self-regulatory model of resource scarcity, that was the goal, was to offer a working definition that was general enough to serve these different literatures so we could really say, hey, everybody, we should be speaking to each other because we're all talking about the same thing. So the definition we came up with was simply observing or sensing a disparity between kind of where you are and a reference point. And we use the term reference point, which I think is important. It comes from psychology and economics. It's just, again, it's a standard, and that can come from so many different places. What your parents told you should make when you grew up, that could be your reference point for income. But so could your hopes and dreams you self-generated. So it could be intrinsically created. It can be socially created, where your friends across campus tell you how much they're making on their first job offer, and now all of a sudden that's your reference point. And what was really powerful was we observed whether or not the reference point is important or matters or is true, it can really shift around how you feel about what you have in a powerful way. And I think that's so important for people to understand, because in reality, especially here in the United States, many of us have so much, but yet as we go through our days, we're bombarded with these messages that tell us we don't have enough. And those can lead to all kinds of different psychological outcomes, not all positive.
I love that. So Kelly, I'll just pause there because I love what you just said. I come from a tradition in psychology and social policy that focuses on economic insufficiency or income insufficiency, right? It's very narrowly defined from the framework that you just provided. Can a person cover the cost of their rent? Can they get enough groceries on the table for their family? Can they pay for an unexpected car repair, right? That level of sort of financial insufficiency. But you're talking about a really different and broader sense of how I am in the world relative to what I hope for, what I expect. And I love what you just said about so many of us have so much and yet we feel like we don't have enough. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think it happens in so many different ways. For example, social media, I consider to be the kind of horseman of the subjective scarcity apocalypse, right? As I go through my day, maybe I just got back from spring break. I went to Costa Rica with my family. That's pretty amazing. But as I scroll through social media, I say, they went to Paris. They went to the Maldives. How the heck did they find time to go to the Maldives with their 4 kids? Where's the money for that? Now, all of a sudden, my trip that was kind of a really big deal for my family doesn't feel so special. And so I think, again, that's dangerous. And again, I could talk about this all day, but from a marketing standpoint, you've got these social media engines that are embedded with cues that make us feel like this subjective sense of what we have isn't enough. And then what else do you see in your social media feed is ads, right?
Yes,
and so
totally.
we're made to feel like we don't have enough. And then they put in front of us these brilliant, amazingly created targeted ads that just give you a quick way to engage in that self-repair. And so I think it's been really interesting to unpack the psychology of scarcity, because I think it has far-reaching consequences for both marketing and understanding kind of consumer risks associated with the brilliance of marketing these days.
So fascinating. And the example that you just gave, I think, highlights one of the really great papers that I reviewed of yours that really highlights the sense of comparison with others or competition, right? That idea that your trip may or may not measure up in this moment when you place yourself next to your peers or in competition with your peers, right? That somehow that it cues a sense of scarcity, but also that scarcity could actually trigger a stronger sense of competition.
Right.
Tell us more about that, the sense that we're not always as friendly and warm to each other if suddenly there's fewer cookies on the table,
Yes,
if there's the last piece
true.
of pie.
Yes, I think this is, she's referencing my first paper we ever published in this space, which was a really exciting paper to bring into the universe, because as we started unpacking across disciplines what we know about how scarcity doesn't just affect human behavior, but animal behavior, all the above, is you would see a lot of this competitive response. When there's less food in the jungle, people compete, or animals too, compete harder for it. Same with jobs, and if there's an economic downturn and so on and so forth. But also, there was some glimpses of hope that scarcity can actually make people more generous. So oftentimes people with less to give spend more time volunteering, give a higher percentage of their income than people would have more discretionary income.
So it's not just about I have more and I can give more, or I have less and therefore I value so much more what each unit is, whether it's $1 or a bag of groceries, and therefore I'm more generous.
Right, absolutely. I think there was a view in some of the literature that scarcity is this blunt instrument that makes you more myopic or focused on just serving yourself and kind of tunes you out to helping others. But as we took a broad view on the across disciplines in the literature, it wasn't always true. And so what we wanted to do in our first paper was really find a moderator, right? Find what toggles, what's the switch, or one switch, there could be multiple, but what toggles people back and forth between when I perceive this disparity between where I am and where I want to be, what makes me engage in these really kind of advancing my own welfare, potentially at the expense of others, right? So these self-protective motives potentially, versus what makes me realize, right, I can actually contribute to others in that moment when I even feel like I don't have enough. And I'm sure, like any, you're a psychologist, there's always lots of moderators to these things, but the one that we landed on just as a starting point was really sometimes when we feel like we don't have enough, we become keenly aware on returns on investment from allocating our resources. And sometimes the most advantageous way to allocate our resources is actually to help others, because then down the future, they may help us in return. Or maybe we share the resource and we all benefit. So it's not always that scarcity is this blunt instrument that makes us focused on ourselves and the ground in front of us, but rather, again, it makes us more strategic. And I think that insight was really a big light bulb for me and my research team, because I think we did want to believe it wasn't all bad news. I think we really wanted to believe there could be some silver lining. And then we found those initial results, and we have found subsequently that it's really true. When you feel like you don't have enough, honestly, you become better at a lot of things. And one of them is that strategic deployment of resources. And you are aware sometimes the best way to help yourself is by helping others.
And I love that you did this in a really straightforward experimental context. Just remind us, I recall that you essentially elicited people's fears or feelings around scarcity by having them talk about times in their lives where they didn't feel like they had enough.
Yes.
Whether they came from a high incomer or a less well-resourced, economically well-resourced household, you got them to invoke that. And then in terms of competition, that notion that they had $6 and there was an opportunity for them to stick $1 in an envelope for a children's foundation or something.
Right, UNICEF,
right?
Yes.
UNICEF.
Children of Sudan.
Perfect. So I remember
this is an amazing provost, right? She's not even reading notes. I'm impressed.
No, I'm just saying. And then the question was simply, would they put the dollar in the envelope? Tell us a little bit more about how you engineered them to be more altruistic versus less so.
I love the specificity of this question. So I will freely disclose here, and I think it's important to say, when I use the word scarcity, even a lot of people assume I study people on the kind of tail end of the income distribution, which certainly is a form of financial scarcity. And I wish I had have more studies in that vein. But what's interesting is, and our provost would know this, when you get started as a junior faculty member, which is when I began this research, it was my first year out of the gate when I was at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, you have kind of budget constraints you're operating under, and studying people, they're kind of harder to reach populations. I just didn't have the budget where I felt confident. Couldn't have NGO relationships to work with people, subsistence farmers in rural India, which later on out of Princeton and Harvard, they did great scarcity research in that space, but I didn't have those connections or that kind of money. So I thought, okay, well, what do I have? And what I had was Northwestern undergraduates and people who agreed to take studies online. And so I thought, well, okay.
Great.
They can experience scarcity too. So what we did, and the study that the provost is referencing, was we brought people into the lab. Again, these were Northwestern undergraduates, and we had them engage in what is referred to in our literature as an episodic recall task. And we had to fine-tune the episodic recall task over time. What we got to was just recalling instances when you felt like you didn't have enough in the past week versus a control condition where we'd ask something, list 3 to 5 things you did in the past week versus list 3 to 5 times when you felt like you didn't have enough. And this was an important development because I'm sure you're familiar with the control level theory literature, but that was, if you get people to think too far back in time, that can change what they focus on. So we wanted to constrain the time frame. And it's interesting because, again, Northwestern undergrads, they're not recalling really dire experiences of not having enough. A lot of the stuff was, I wanted cereal this morning and I didn't have milk. I had to take a Scantron test and I didn't have a number 2 pencil. We've coded them and we've tested all the hypotheses, and really systematically what we found was, number 1, it didn't matter the severity of what they recalled, but number 2, again, what they recalled was really these everyday experiences of not having enough. Well, it's, in my opinion, I know I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent. To me, that's actually important because that shows us these really mundane experiences of not having enough can activate a different mindset. Imagine if we have a recession. Right? Yeah. Again, there's really powerful macroeconomic cues about scarcity. So I actually liked the fact that it was really relatively simple stuff. And then in the experiment that you referenced, what we did was we had people recall these incidences. They had some filler tasks. And then we wanted to make it an anonymous donation scenario in that experiment because we really wanted to tamp down any social signaling motives for donating. So there's just an envelope that's at your workstation. It had a $5 bill and a $1 bill in it. They knew they were getting $5 to participate in the study, so that was not new information. The $1 was kind of a windfall. And we asked them, today you have this special opportunity to donate to UNICEF's children of Sudan's Darfur. You could just leave the $1 in the envelope if you choose to donate, and the research assistant will pick it up later, versus you can take it with you. And the research assistant was never going to know. And what we found in that experiment was actually, this is like behavioral, DV is behavioral dependent variable, we call it in my field. Our journals always want to see, will actually people make a decision involving actual money.
Not just what you say
not just cheap talk, right? Not hypothetical.
Do you actually leave the dollar behind?
1 to 7 scale. Yeah. Do you actually leave that $1 that you could actually spend? And what we found was people who had recalled these relatively mundane experiences of not having enough were significantly more likely to take that $1 with them. So they're more likely to keep it for themselves. And we replicated this with classic economic games like the dictator game. People were more likely to allocate money to themselves versus the other player, so on and so forth. So again, bad news, right? Scarcity makes people seem more selfish. So that was convergent with a lot of the existing wisdom, not convergent with the idea that it could be moderated. And what we did later was we built on this with another study that was really designed for our undergrads, where we manipulated the activation of scarcity with the same episodic recall task. Then we had them imagine a scenario that we thought undergrads face a lot, where they're studying for a final and it's really hard and their friend helps them. And because their friend helps them, they do well. And so then we had a bunch of measures about, okay, well, would you give the friend something to say thank you? How much would you spend? Proxies for generosity. And what we found, consistent with the UNICEF donations, when that was all we said, people in the scarcity condition were significantly less generous than the control condition, consistent with the existing wisdom that scarcity can make you more self-focused or allocate more to yourself. But this was the moderator. When we reminded them, look, if you help this person now, they might help you in the future. Actually, those people who had scarcity that was activated and knew by helping this person, they might receive help in the future, they were actually the most generous out of everybody.
Fascinating.
Well, it was good news, right? Because I'm like, okay, we have found a moderator. It's not always bad. It's not always good. In fact, there is some it depends here. And that was our first paper, and it was really generative.
Yeah. And I love the second version where you actually say, we're going to list your name publicly
yes.
at work for donating, right?
Oh my goodness. I forgot that we had a moderator. We did the initial study and then follow-up studies. She's very good. Okay, you guys, I'm going to take this a step back because the provost is helping me out. So we're going back to the UNICEF's Children of Sudan Darfur. So scarcity mindset versus not, control condition, scarcity, more likely to take the money than leave it in the envelope. But we also went back and introduced that moderator where we say, if you donate the money, there will be this social signaling benefits where everybody else is going to see that you donated. And then it's consistent with that moderator we found on the person may help you again in the future. People primed with a scarcity mindset were, again, aware of the value of these social benefits and other people thinking positively of them, and they were more likely to give.
What does that say for nonprofits that are trying to raise money, particularly around issues of, how the environment is going to fare if we keep using everything, right? That language of, use of more resource means there's less resource soon, and therefore, send in your donation to protect the fill in the blank, the wildlife, the Costa Rican forest, the beautiful, environment that we all enjoy. It sounds like if you trigger scarcity as the driving force behind that message, you may be going down the wrong track.
Yes, it is a dangerous game. And I have actually designed and run the exact kind of study you're proposing so many times. And I still, because in my head, it's right that if you activate this sense of scarcity, like environmental scarcity, for example, the world is running out of bees or clean water or you name it, right? In theory, that should make people kind of scared and self-protective and looking to advance their own welfare and therefore less likely to donate. And we've manipulated things like, well, is it in my community versus is it a community that's geographically very distal? And so like helping them has no direct benefit to me. I still have not nailed this design yet, Sibel. So if you have, maybe we'll follow up with ideas because I do feel like it is a real risk to nonprofits that are advocating in that space. And that obviously down the road can have deleterious consequences for our ability to maintain
and
resources.
if not around environment, I would imagine also around things like the public library or any form of public good, right?
Yeah.
How you signal not just virtue, but that you are contributing in a public way versus if you're contributing anonymously.
Correct. I've worked with a ton of nonprofits through the years because I do research. When you do research on scarcity, I think you're invariably going to touch that space. And one thing I advocate to them, especially when you're dealing with an economic downturn, is you do need to remind you're very generous, lovely. Everybody's a good person, in my opinion. Like everyone has a good heart, but sometimes you got to focus on yourself because you're worried, right? And then you'll worry about everybody else later. And it's just good to remind them, like by benefiting the National Public Library, for example, right? There's also benefits to you. It engages in community building in all sorts of ways. They have amazing resources where they train up the next generation of podcasters and other things at the National Public Library. So how can you make salient the benefits to them that come from supporting these organizations? And I will say, and I know I talk too much, but I get very excited about this topic. One thing I run into is a little bit of pushback where the data is the data, so it's not like I'm wrong, but people will say, well, that's impure altruism. If you're just giving to get, there's something wrong.
No, I was just going to go down that road.
Well, and I feel like nonprofits that I talk to,
altruism?
they get bummed, right? Nobody wants to say, here's what's in it for you. They want you to do it for the love of the game. And I always remind people, like, at the end of the day, get the money and figure it out later, right? Once you get the money, you can use it for all the good you want to. But if you can't break through to people and get them over the hump of donating during times when they experience scarcity, you don't get the benefit of supporting the community or supporting the environment or whatever is you're working towards as a nonprofit.
No, it makes total sense. And it also aligns, I think, with our observation with athletics, right? That it's super important to embrace and get everyone involved in feeling like they're part of the winning team.
Right.
And then when our team wins, everyone's contributions to athletics go up, right?
Yes.
Because that altruism is triggered by or connected with somehow a sense of being part of a winning team.
Right, exactly, right? It's a community. When I give to the community, I see the benefits, I see the smiling faces around me. And I will say, as a side note, flying back from Costa Rica on Saturday. And in the airport, all anybody could talk about in the line for the plane was the Vanderbilt basketball score. And it felt so cool as a Vanderbilt professor. I mean, I've been in many different institutions and I've never experienced that type of joy. And people are running around saying, oh, I got the score and I've got Wi-Fi and here's what it is. And it was really exciting. And so I think building that sense of community at such an academic institution, again, that's something that has far-reaching positive consequences.
What defines happiness, and how does it travel alongside achievement and purpose? These are some powerful questions no matter where you are in life. Coming up in our next episode, I talk with best-selling author, scholar, and thought leader Arthur Brooks. He spent his career examining the science around our pursuit of happiness, and it's a riveting conversation that you won't want to miss. But now, let's get back to my discussion with Kelly. Kelly, are you also planning on or interested in the flip side of the coin in terms of thinking about abundance, right? That image of you in the airport where everyone is in a great mood sounds very bountiful, right?
Yes.
It does not sound scarce.
Yes, it felt bountiful. But I will tell you, I've tried. So abundance is tricky. And I think there's a reason why you don't see, once we got into the scarcity space, a lot of people also got into it. And so it's a whole cottage industry now within marketing, which is very exciting to be an early part of. But abundance does not have a cottage industry. And I think, not that people haven't tried, myself included, I think the reason is because here in the United States, number one, we actually have a lot. Number two, we expect to have a lot. We expect to have 60,000 unique SKUs when we walk into the average American grocery store. So making us feel like we have a lot, it's hard to bump that above control.
Yes, I remember, going to a grocery store in the Czech Republic just after it had become the Czech Republic. And it blew my mind to walk in and see 10 things on the grocery store shelves, not, 10,000 things. Right. It was very sort of abrupt in its truth, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we expect to have a lot here because we do.
Yeah.
And so what I have found empirically is just ratcheting that up is tough. So yeah, there's not as much in that space.
Oh, interesting.
Right now.
So you don't have as much, it's harder to get more variance.
Correct.
Or more sort of highs and lows in a sense of abundance.
This was not my data, but another researcher told me the only way she could get it to work is if you drag people down and make them feel like they don't have enough, then you cue abundance, you can get it to go up. But it's really hard to bump it above control just as like an episodic recall task. Because again, number one, we have a lot. So it's just hard to get it to go up. Number two, we expect to have a lot. So it's hard to make us feel surprised and delighted, which is also sad, listeners, right? Like we should feel surprised and delighted when we encounter abundance. And so these reference points, when what you expect to have, I think about our undergrads, right? When what you expect to have as a job or make as a salary, when it's so high, it's just really hard to be surprised and delighted. So that's another call to action to really carefully curate the reference points you allow into your life.
I love it. I love the idea of perhaps even slowing down enough to identify when those moments occur,
yes.
Right? When I feel surprised, when I feel delighted. I love that. So talking back on the side of when I feel much less surprised or delighted, you've gotten this great traction, I think, on this idea of regulating ourselves, regulating oneself. Of course, that is a construct that resonates deeply for me intellectually. So self-regulation in the context of scarcity, when we don't feel that we have enough, it's not just that we don't feel that we have enough, it's whether we can do anything about it, right?
Correct.
So can you tell us a little bit about this idea of control and how we manage those moments when we do or don't feel like we have any control over the situation?
Yes. I love talking about this and I love thinking about this and I think about it in the context of my everyday life and I think about this as a researcher too. Once again, so we started our first work in scarcity around 2009, 2010. And then as our little cottage industry grew, we've got all sorts of new papers that are now specifically about scarcity. And even within our top marketing journals specifically about scarcity with all kinds of different findings we had to, again, try to reconcile. Like, okay, not everybody's lining up. Let's take a step back. Can we find a moderator? And one thing we observed was some findings were aligned with actually like a heightened sense of self-control, where you observe a disparity between where you are and where you want to be. Let's say financially is an easy example for most people. So, I make $60,000 a year. I decide I want to make $100,000 a year. And sometimes what you would find across papers is that makes people, it like activates a goal, right? Where I've got this reference point. I want to be at $100,000 a year. And as we know from the rich literature in psychology, when we have a goal that's activated, it's almost like our brain scans the environment for means to achieve that goal. And we may not get to $100,000 a year, but we'll oftentimes get closer because we tried, because we're cognitively attuned to finding those means or in the world around us. So that's positive, right? So if scarcity can create a goal and make us move closer towards the goal, that's a positive self-regulatory outcome. But we'd also, and this would be now my research, oftentimes would find outcomes that were consistent with a lack of self-control. Like, for example, there's research, this was not mine, but other people have found where you'll actually overspend when you feel like you don't have enough. And that's wacky if you think about it as an economist, because, I want to make 100,000 and I'm making 60. So why am I spending, $8 on a Starbucks latte and $200 on shoes when my goal was to get more money, not less? And so we had to think this, again, take a big step back and try to find a moderator that would predict how we could both, with very similar manipulations, get outcomes consistent with losing, like a lack of self-control, as well as outcomes consistent with even more self-control. It was hard to reconcile. Nobody likes to sacrifice money or anything in the present for the benefit of the future because the future is far away. So understanding like how these feelings of not having enough, like let's take financial services firms, right? So if I feel like I don't have enough today, how do I get people to save for retirement? So there we talk about creating a goal, making it feel actionable, helping them identify means to the goal, giving them a sense of agency, all these things, right? So that's positive. So I try to keep it there. But on the flip side, it's not like marketers aren't aware that when it feels like the world is falling apart, this might be a great time to sell $500 cat tents. So I think then the onus is on us as consumers to understand our compensatory responses, which doesn't have to be that complicated. Just kind of a little introspection about why, do you really need this? And also, what are your goals, right? It's so easy. And again, I'm talking to a psychologist, so I feel sheepish even highlighting this. But with goals, with higher order goals, where there's oftentimes going to be a longer term payoff with a present day sacrifice, it's so easy to lose sight of the goal. So like, again, saving money, maintenance, fitness, whatever you want to do with your body, oftentimes longer term payoff, skincare, you name it, right? So how do you keep that goal salient so that it drives your decisions in the present without slipping into kind of receding into the background noise and letting whatever your Instagram feed tells you should do in the moment take over?
Totally. But I think those apps are super, super skilled at keeping us attached to the goal and keeping us attached to some accountability and some forward progress, right? That idea that you get pinged every time you enter the data in MyFitnessTracker, or you get pinged if your friends have completed their 5-mile run in the morning, right? That there's this way in which the heightening of the salience of the goal seems to be either scarily or optimistically super easily reinforced electronically.
Yes. I think that, again, know yourself and know which apps work for you. Because I think for some people, it obviously has a positive effect, right? Where when you remind people their bank balance is low, they might spend less and therefore get closer to whatever their financial goals are. And the fitness apps too, the same way. A lot of apps have tried to, Weight Watchers, who I work with, and we had their former CEO actually just out here to Owen recently, where they've gamified the experience and there's a social component. And apparently the social community of Weight Watchers is very positive, where you post and everybody cheers you. And so that can be a way to, again, make you get a reward in the present, even though in theory, the long-term payoff for the higher order goal is so far in the future.
An immediate dopamine hit that happens to keep reinforcing the long-term objective.
Yes.
Fascinating. You've also counseled us to be wary or to be alert to the ways in which trust can really be broken online and digitally. And I love the work that you've been doing on basically claiming scarcity or claiming that we're out of time, that soon the sale will end, that works in the real world, but it doesn't actually work online. That we know to distrust that message when it's a flashing screen image rather than, some nice shop clerk who's telling us that this is the last one.
Yes. And I think this paper was really fun to work on because to me, this was some positive data supporting the fact that consumers can be informed and can be empowered, and we don't have to just be at the whims of whatever marketers tell us. If we think back to how we all used to shop, even, in my day, you would go to your local mall or like main street of your town, and there were stores. And if the store had a sale, then you got your pants on sale. And if the store didn't have a sale, you did not get your pants on sale, but you bought what was there, and that was kind of what was available to you. And people didn't have the luxury of shopping literally, 2-day delivery from places all over the world, just in their pocket all the time. And so nowadays, because we do have that luxury, I think what these marketing messages mean has really changed. And I think in the marketing literature, there's some mainstays of the marketer's toolkit, like scarcity creates value is definitely one of them, that people just assume will still work. And I think that paper called into question, consumers are very smart. And we understand that it's not like we're looking our favorite friendly shop owner in the eyes and they're telling us that they have to run this limited promotion on pants and therefore we should get the pants in their store today. In fact, when we're getting these messages from here, there, and everywhere, consumers have learned, look, maybe that's not true.
Yeah.
And so what we found, many findings in that paper, but one that I loved was when people receive, specifically time scarcity was what we looked at. When they received time scarcity messages in online, so limited time to buy, they were more likely to open another browser, like they were more likely to search. And what they were searching for was to see, okay, can I find the same deal somewhere else? Or even a close, like maybe the price is a little higher, but a close deal somewhere else where I don't have this pressure. And that's the opposite of what firms want. Firms don't want you to search elsewhere. Yes. And so that was exciting for me.
Fascinating.
And we have a lot of power as consumers. So it's good to see.
It's totally fascinating, but it also seems like it drives demand for crazy things, right? Like why on Vanderbilt's campus are we suddenly really obsessed with Squishmallows? Because there's only a set number of them that will be handed out at a basketball game.
I know, and I didn't get one, and I'm bummed, right? Imagine what it's doing to my psychology. I'm going to go and not donate. I will still donate to charity.
When the number is scarce or when it's created to be scarce.
Right.
It is really crazily effective because
I know.
It'll drive demand for stuff we didn't even know we had the need for.
Well, right? And maybe we don't even need it, right? And so when we published, this is probably for our first paper, I think, we got a reviewer, because you get these reviews back from folks and oftentimes scathing and oftentimes takes years to convince them. But somebody was saying, well, what if you're allergic to chocolate and you get this memo that the world's running out of chocolate? You're still not going to buy chocolate. And I was like, honestly, I'm not convinced, right? Because now chocolate's more valuable. So you could hoard up all the chocolate and sell it later or give it to your mom. Oh, look at mom. I got you chocolate when it was running out. So it's really tricky if this trigger can increase our purchase behavior, even when we objectively have no need for the product. That's a very powerful marketing tool.
So fascinating. And this whole idea that you have really helped me to understand that a sale is not just a single on-off switch, but that there's the top of the funnel, bringing the person to touch the quality of the fabric before looking at the price tag, to imagine what their lives might be with the new sneakers before they actually get to clicking on the purchase button, right?
Yes.
So just walk us through how you as a marketing professor think about that funnel.
Yeah. If you have never taken a marketing class, first of all, you should, and you should come to Vanderbilt and take one from me. But when you think about but anywhere, you can get these funnels elsewhere too. So when you think about what drives you to purchase, right? At first, it's very general. Like think about billboards you pass on the freeway. There's not a lot of detail. There's not a lot of pricing. It's usually a cool picture and the logo, right? And so that's what we call top of the funnel, where you're building awareness, you're maybe building interest, you're making it salient to people, letting them know it's in the universe, but that's kind of early days. And a lot of people get blasted out that message. The reason it's a funnel is you got less people as you progress through. So I see the ad on the freeway, let's say Squishmallows, right? I see the ad for Squishmallows on the freeway. Oh, cool, squishy thing, neat. Squishmallows logo. Then, right, it's in my brain, but I'm not searching for it online. But then I happen to go to Walgreens and I actually see one. And I said, I'm going to reach out and touch it because I saw the ad for it. Now I've had this tactile experience with it. I get a sense of the quality. And we move further down the funnel into the phase where it's kind of like, why us and not them? Where I'm comparing Squishmallows to other options, perhaps, unless it's like such a dynamic, limited time Squishmallow, I can't resist. So now I'm thinking Squishmallow versus do I want to buy something more practical at the Walgreens? And pricing is typically thought of as like a further down the funnel tactic because you have to be pretty interested in the product to look at the price, right? And so what's going to kick us over the edge to justify, all right, why the Squishmallow and not something more practical in the Walgreens? Oh my gosh, limited time Squishmallow. Or oh my gosh,
$22 to spend for a birthday gift.
Yes.
This is now in the range.
This is in the range, right? And so oftentimes that's why, and spoiler alert, you guys all know this, but like when you put something in your cart and abandon your cart, on Etsy, you will get an email within a certain number of days that tells you it's 20% off, right? Because it's a limit. They know you're so close to the end of the funnel, they just want to kick you over into clicking buy now.
And so the way in which the timing of that scarce resource message or that scarce time message, or you get this price cut today, but you don't get it tomorrow, often used at the end of the funnel.
That is correct.
Occasionally, you've suggested that it's even getting a person to open the email link at the top, but it's often at the bottom.
It's often at the bottom, which is why you see them a lot in store. You see them a lot in grocery. You'll see them in all kinds of retail stores that they may not even advertise them online, right? Because they know it's really advantageous if you're there and you're just thinking about it, right? You just want to get it done.
And so what does that teach us about the sense of trust? If we actually know that our preferences and our interests and ultimately our purchasing decisions are being shaped,
yes,
why is it that we ultimately build trust with an unknown vendor, somebody online, that's just offering it for the right price? What's the real pivot on that sense of not just is it priced correctly, but do I trust who's selling this to me? Do I believe I'm going to get what I'm paying for?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's one that all brands and anyone who sells anything should care about. I think, like, let's say, for example, you love Ann Taylor suit pants and you know your size and you've bought 3 pairs before. You see they're running a promotion, it hits your inbox. Even though you know these promotions are largely manipulative, you're like, okay, but I am aware of the quality of the product. And even if it's not the best deal, it's a decent deal, right? And so I think experience can be a real important predictor of trust, but probably not the only predictor of trust. So for example, if you get a promotion from Nike.com on a pair of shoes, Nike's a well-respected, huge American brand that's been around for a long time. Also, Nike doesn't need small potatoes, right? So Nike's not grasping for money probably, though actually their stock value has been going down, but that's a whole separate story for a separate time. So anyway, so you think you might trust it because it's Nike. But if you get just an ad from My Teresa, which is based out of Italy, and they have the same exact pair of Nikes and even be way less money, but you've never bought from My Teresa. You do not know why they're doing this. You do not even know how long will it take the shoes to get here from Italy. Those things, I think, can erode trust. So like trust in the brand based on your historical understanding of the brand, and then trust really it's almost like your trust in the product supersedes your trust in the exact value of the deal, if you're familiar with the product.
Fascinating. And how much do our students really see that map onto either their own experience or their own hopes for their own futures, their own plans for being able to be in business? You have massive numbers of undergrads as well as graduate students at Owen because of our undergraduate business minor.
Yes.
How does this land with them?
You guys, not well enough. So if any undergrads are listening and you're like, I have to be in iBanking or I have to be in consulting because my older brother went into iBanking or my sister was this top-notch consultant. These are reference points. These are paper tigers. We don't all need to have the same job just because everybody else seems to have a similar job. I think there's some things we're doing in the undergraduate business minor that are really great for broadening the spectrum of career possibilities, even within something like finance. It doesn't just have to be investment banking. There's so many different jobs. Like investment banking just can't be right for everybody. That's just not empirically true. So I think we're really intentional within the minor to try to broaden the aperture on what people will consider success coming out of undergrad and what people will be excited about within business. And again, I think it just cannot be accurate that so many of you are dying to be investment bankers or consultants, right? Again, there's a large social component and that reference point that gets created.
What would you like us to leave with, thinking through all of the things that you've talked about in terms of scarcity, in terms of how much it can be so easily manipulated and how much we have to think through the kind of ways in which we can control both the way we respond to those cues and the next actions we take? What are the final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I would say, we all only get this one beautiful, broken, fantastic life. And so as we go through it, right, be careful about who you compare yourself to, what you compare yourself to, the voices you allow to creep inside your head, because the only voice that really matters in your head is yours. And do the things you love to do and feel great about that. And we all have so much, and we have so much to be grateful for. So spend a little bit more time reflecting on that, no matter what Instagram says.
Kelly, thank you so much. I think your work reminds us not only of the business context and the economic context, but the personal context in which we live and in which we take in all those messages. Here at Vanderbilt, as we build these new systems, these new colleges, these new models of interdisciplinary education, understanding how those systems shape human behavior isn't optional. It's really essential. And I'm so grateful to you for leading us in that conversation in so many ways. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
The Quantum Potential podcast comes from Vanderbilt University. I'm your host, Sibel Raver, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs with Vanderbilt University. Thank you to our guest, Kelly Goldsmith, E. Bronson Ingram Chair in Marketing at the Owen Graduate School of Management and Faculty Director of the Ingram Scholars Program. This episode was edited and mixed by the team at Sound On, Sound Off. You can learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. For more information about quantum potential, go to vanderbilt.edu/quantum potential. Thank you for joining us today for the Quantum Potential Podcast. Stay tuned for more conversations with the thinkers and innovators reshaping our world. I'm Sibel Raver, and this has been Quantum Potential.